The sand still clung to his lips when they dragged him into the courtyard. His wrists were bound with iron bands that hummed faintly, alien tech pulsing with blue energy. He tried to pull against them, once, twice, but the bonds tightened until his skin burned. The crowd of colonists watched in silence, their faces pale, their eyes lowered. No one dared cheer or cry out. He was the example, the warning, the lesson carved into flesh. The alien commander, scaled and tall, spoke in its guttural tongue. A translator crackled the words across the courtyard. This human defied the Empire. He lives, but he no longer belongs to himself. He is property. He is nothing. The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one dared move. The commander turned to the dais, where she stood. At first glance, she looked human, pale skin, long dark hair tied into a braid, eyes like winter steel. But she was not one of them, not anymore. She wore alien armor molded to her frame, glowing insignias that marked her as a governor, one of the chosen, a collaborator elevated above the broken masses. They called her Lady Selene. She stepped forward with slow, deliberate grace, her boots clicking against stone. The alien commander bowed his head slightly as she passed, showing her more respect than he'd ever show to the people she came from. Her gaze lingered on the soldier. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of hesitation, but it was gone as quickly as it came. On behalf of the Empire, the translator announced in her voice, "I accept this prisoner. He is mine to command." The bonds at his wrists glowed and tightened again. He stumbled forward, forced to his knees before her. The soldier raised his head, meeting her eyes with fury that even torture hadn't burned out. His throat was raw, his voice cracked, but he still found the strength to spit a single word. Traitor. Her jaw tensed, but she did not strike him. Instead, she tilted her head and studied him as though he were some strange animal she had been handed. Then she turned and motioned for the guards to release him into her custody. They shoved him forward until he collapsed at her feet. That was how it began. Inside her residence, a fortress of steel and glass rising above the ruins of the colony. He was nothing more than a shadow. They fed him scraps, just enough to keep him alive. They made him kneel by the cold hearth while she dined in silence. When her alien escorts weren't watching, she would give him commands softly, her voice calm but firm. Fetch this. Clean that. Kneel here. He obeyed because the alternative was death. But in his mind, the fire never went out. He kept his back straight, even on his knees. He ate the scraps with his jaw tight, refusing to let her see weakness. He was a soldier of Earth, and though his body was shackled, his spirit remained his own. Selene noticed. Sometimes, at night, she lingered near the shadows where he sat. She would stand with her arms crossed, watching him without speaking, as if trying to understand why this broken man still glared at her like a wolf with teeth bared. "Do you know what happens to those who disobey?" she asked one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at her, his lip bleeding from the blow of a guard earlier that day. He didn't answer. She crouched, close enough that he could see the faint tremble in her fingers before she clenched them into a fist. "They don't just kill you. They erase you. They burn every trace, every memory. Even your name disappears. Do you understand?" He met her gaze, fire in his eyes. Better to vanish free than live a slave. Her breath caught. Something flickered in her expression. Pain, anger, maybe something else. But she stood and walked away before he could see more. Days bled into nights. He grew weaker, thinner, but never bowed. Selene grew harsher in front of the aliens, commanding him with sharp words, forcing him to kneel lower, to endure humiliation. But in the rare moments when they were alone, her voice softened, as though she was speaking to a man and not to property. Once, when he collapsed from exhaustion, she didn't call the guards. Instead, she knelt beside him and pressed a small flask of water to his lips. "Drink," she murmured, eyes darting toward the door. "Quickly, before they see." The water tasted of metal, but it kept him alive. "Why?" he rasped. Her lips pressed into a hard line. "Because if you die too soon, they win." And she stopped herself, straightened, and pulled the flask away. "I need you alive." He wanted to hate her. Every bone in his body told him she was a traitor, a collaborator who had chosen safety and privilege over freedom. But when her hand brushed his cheek that night, not in command, but in something closer to apology, he realized the truth was not so simple. She was chained, too. Her chains just gleamed brighter. And though he swore he would never forgive her, something in his chest stirred when her eyes lingered too long, when her breath hitched as she ordered him to his knees. Desire and defiance tangled in a knot neither of them could untangle. He told himself he would escape. He told himself he would kill her if he had to. But when she leaned down one night, her lips hovering inches from his ear as she whispered, "You are not nothing, no matter what they say," his resolve cracked. For the first time, he wondered if the shackles of the colony were not just forged of steel and fire, but of flesh, longing, and something dangerously close to love. The chains rattled with every movement, heavy iron clamped around his wrists, digging into flesh already bruised from battle. He had been a soldier once, a fighter, a man of grit and fury who refused to bend, even when the sky itself collapsed with alien fire. Now he was nothing more than a prize dragged through dirt and humiliation, presented before her like a trophy animal. She sat above him on a throne of stone and alloy, a throne gifted by the invaders. They had taken her from the ranks of the conquered, raised her up, clothed her in silks and armor that shimmered with alien insignia, and called her governor. She was still human, but not like him. She had power, command, and her voice was sharp with authority when she ordered him to kneel. He obeyed, but not the way she wanted. His body lowered, but his eyes never dipped. They stared back at her, burning, unbroken, defiant. At first, she tried to ignore it. His stare was insolence. His refusal to submit entirely was weakness, she told herself. Yet every day it gnawed at her. When she told him to scrub the floors, he did, but his hands moved with deliberate slowness, his jaw tight, as if he scrubbed away not filth but rage. When she told him to eat the scraps from her table, he chewed them as though he were feasting, daring her to see that humiliation could not touch him. He did not grovel. He endured. And endurance, she realized, was louder than obedience. One evening, when the twin moons rose over the colony and cast pale light through the slats of her chamber, she found herself watching him instead of dismissing him. His shirt was torn from labor, and beneath the dirt she glimpsed scars, deep, ugly scars carved across his ribs and back. Some were burns, others the ragged memory of blades. They weren't the marks of a soldier who had surrendered easily. They were a map of resistance, of battles fought long after he should have fallen. Her chest tightened in a way she couldn't name. She had grown used to power, to obedience, to men and women lowering their heads when she entered a room. Yet here was one man who would rather choke on blood than lower his spirit. She told herself it was anger that drove her toward him. She crossed the room, stood over him where he knelt cleaning the floor, and demanded, "Why do you look at me like that?" He lifted his head, chains clinking, and spoke with a low voice that cracked the silence. "Because I know what you were before this. You were one of us. You bled like us. You lost like us." And now, his gaze swept across her throne, the alien banners, the guards at the door. Now you wear their collar and call it crown. Her hand twitched as though she might strike him, but she didn't. She stood frozen, because his words dug deeper than any blade. She had told herself she had chosen survival, that wearing the crown was better than dying nameless in the dirt. Yet in his eyes she saw judgment, and worse, truth. That night she didn't sleep. His words replayed again and again until dawn broke over the alien towers that scarred the colony's horizon. She told herself she would punish him. She would break him until his fire guttered out. But the next morning, when she commanded him to carry her cloak through the marketplace, she caught herself watching his stride. Even in chains, he moved like a soldier. Even in humiliation, he walked with pride. People noticed. The other humans, broken and weary, lifted their eyes to look at him, and for a flicker of a moment, they too stood straighter. It unsettled her. That evening, she had him brought into her private hall. He stood there, arms bound, sweat and dirt streaking his skin. She told him to kneel again, just to hear the clank of his chains. He lowered himself, but again those eyes. That unyielding stare. "Do you hate me?" she asked suddenly. The question left her lips before she could stop it. He blinked, perhaps surprised that she would ask. Then his mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not cruel, not mocking, but something sharper, more dangerous. "No," he said. "I hate what you chose. But you? You're still one of us, whether you want to admit it or not." The word struck harder than any defiance he had shown before. Her throat tightened, her pulse quickened. She should have laughed at him, called him a fool, ordered his execution just to prove how wrong he was. But instead, she dismissed her guards and lingered with him in the silence. She found herself asking questions she had no reason to ask, about the scars on his body, about the battles he fought. He answered in clipped sentences, but each story was a fragment of something she had almost forgotten: courage, loyalty, sacrifice. And when he spoke of comrades lost, his voice caught in a way that made her chest ache. Later, when he was led back to his quarters, little more than a stone cell, she stood at her window long into the night. She could still see his eyes, could still feel the weight of his words pressing against the armor she had built around herself. She had risen to power by cutting ties with her own kind, by pretending their suffering was no longer hers. But his defiance was a mirror she could not avoid. She realized then that her crown was not freedom. It was another form of shackle, invisible but heavier than his chains. And he, her servant, her prisoner, her enemy, had somehow seen it before she did. The next morning, she didn't summon him. She told herself it was because she was busy with alien envoys, with reports, with the endless performance of authority. But deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't summon him because she was afraid. Afraid of the fire in his eyes. Afraid of what it was already doing to her carefully built walls. Yet she knew she would summon him again. She couldn't stop herself, because the chains she thought she had placed on him were beginning to crack inside her. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant hum of alien patrol craft slicing through the skies above the colony. Inside her chambers, the air felt tighter, as if the walls themselves pressed inward to trap her in the life she had chosen. She dismissed her guards earlier than usual, claiming exhaustion, but the truth was different. She wasn't tired. She was restless, haunted by the image of him kneeling yet unbroken, staring back at her like he saw every fracture she tried to hide. He was brought to her quarters, chains rattling softly in the glow of the lanterns. His tasks were simple: to clean, to obey, to remain silent. Yet silence was impossible when every movement he made seemed louder than thunder. She told herself she was watching him out of caution. In reality, she couldn't look away. His shoulders were broad despite the hunger, his hands rough, scarred, the hands of someone who had built, fought, destroyed. He carried himself with a weight she could never match, no matter how many crowns they placed upon her head. She caught herself staring too long, and when his eyes flicked up to meet hers, she almost flinched. That same defiance, that same fire. It wasn't hatred anymore. It was something else, something that stripped away the titles, the thrones, the walls she had wrapped around herself. "Why do you still look at me like that?" she asked, her voice low, but not with authority this time. It trembled, almost human. His answer came slowly, each word pulled like steel from fire. "Because chains don't make you my master. They only make you afraid of what I still am." Her breath caught. She should have punished him, ordered him beaten for insolence. But her hand did not move toward the whip. Instead, it moved without thought, reaching toward him. For a moment, she hovered there, inches from his face, feeling the heat of his skin even through the cold metal scent of his restraints. He didn't lean away. He didn't kneel lower. He simply stood, steady as stone, letting her choose. That choice felt heavier than any crown she had ever worn. Her fingertips brushed his cheek. The roughness of his unshaven jaw sent a jolt through her, more dangerous than any strike of a blade. His eyes widened slightly, but not in fear. In something else. Something she wasn't supposed to see. "You shouldn't," he whispered, the words cutting through the quiet. "I know," she answered, her voice breaking like glass. The chains rattled as he shifted closer, not stepping forward but closing the gap with his presence alone. The air thickened between them, charged with everything they weren't allowed to be. For years she had been untouchable, elevated above her own kind, a symbol of obedience to the alien overlords. Yet here she was, trembling like a woman at the edge of a cliff, reaching for the one man who made her feel alive. His breath brushed against her lips, warm, steady, terrifying. She knew the danger. If the guards returned, if the aliens discovered even a trace of this, both of them would be made examples in ways too brutal to imagine. But danger had never felt so much like freedom. When their foreheads touched, it wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was something rawer, more desperate, survival pressed against desire, rebellion wrapped in silence. "I should hate you," he murmured, voice low, almost pained. "Then hate me," she whispered back, her hand trembling against his jaw. "But don't stop looking at me like that." The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass, burning with everything unsaid. They didn't need more. Not yet. The closeness itself was a rebellion, a crime, a forbidden spark that neither chains nor crowns could smother. And in that stolen heartbeat, they weren't master and servant, governor and slave. They were just a man and a woman, broken, scarred, bound by everything they had lost, clinging to the dangerous fire they had found in each other. The betrayal came not with screams, but with silence. A silence that spread through the governor's chambers like rot, heavy with the weight of watching eyes. She had dismissed her guards too many nights in a row. She had kept him too close, allowed the walls to hide what should never have been hidden. Whispers traveled quickly in the colony, faster than mercy, faster than loyalty. When the aliens came, they did not knock. The doors shattered under their claws, and cold light flooded the room. She rose to her feet, instinctively stepping in front of him, as though her body could shield him from what they already knew. It did not matter. The alien overseer's voice was slick and sharp, dripping with mockery. The governor forgets her place. She lowers herself to touch what should remain in chains. He was dragged forward, his wrists bound tighter, the chains biting into raw skin. They struck him before her eyes, the sound of flesh breaking beneath, iron echoing through the chamber. He did not cry out, and that silence was worse than any scream. Every blow was a message to her. He is nothing. He is ours. And you. So are you. She tried to speak, to explain, to plead. But every word dissolved in her throat, because she knew explanations meant nothing. She had been elevated, decorated, fed, given silks and thrones only because she was useful. Now, stripped of that utility, she was nothing more than another human body to be broken. "Take her crown," the overseer ordered. They tore from her head, the metal scraping her scalp. They stripped the rich fabric from her shoulders, leaving her standing in the same rags as the ones she had once ruled. The chamber that had been hers only hours ago now felt like a cage, and she finally saw the truth she had been blind to. She had been a prisoner too, just gilded in gold. Her gaze snapped to him. His body lay broken on the floor, his chest barely rising, blood pooling beneath him. Yet his eyes, those eyes, still burned. Defiant, unbroken. They told her without words that chains had never owned him, and no crown had ever saved her. When they dragged her down into the cells beside him, shackled and stripped of everything, she finally understood. Slavery was not just the iron around his wrists. It was the silence forced upon a people, the dignity ground into dust, the lie that obedience could ever buy safety. And for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of it, not from above, looking down on the broken, but from within as one of them. In that darkness, she reached through the bars to his trembling hand. He squeezed back, weak but steady, and she realized something else. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of their rebellion. The ruins smelled of dust and fire, the air heavy with the memory of lives erased. Shattered walls leaned into one another like broken ribs, and in their shadows she dragged him, half-conscious, bleeding, yet refusing to let go of her hand. They had escaped by miracle, slipping through a breach while the aliens turned their claws on one another in argument. but freedom was fragile. Freedom was a hunted thing, trembling in the dark. She pressed him against a stone pillar, her fingers trembling as they touched the gashes on his chest. The glow of alien lanterns still burned in her memory, the overseer's laughter echoing in her head. She wanted to be strong, but when she looked at him, scarred, bruised, breath rattling, something inside her cracked. "I never wanted you like that," she whispered. The words tore from her like a confession, raw and desperate. "I never wanted to own you. I only wanted you to look at me. Not as a governor, not as their puppet, just as a woman." His eyes opened slowly, hazy but steady, and the defiance she had seen since the first day still glowed there. Even now, even broken, he would not bow. That fire cut through her guilt sharper than any blade. "You think I didn't see you?" His voice was rough, barely more than a rasp. "I saw you. Every time you gave an order with your head high, but your hands shaking. Every time you hid your fear behind coldness. You were a cage they tried to gild. I saw you fighting yourself just to breathe." The ruins seemed to close in around them, the silence thickening, and suddenly her tears spilled, hot and relentless. She leaned into him, her lips brushing his, as if begging forgiveness. He kissed her back, even through the pain, even through the chains still biting his wrists. That kiss was not ownership. It was surrender and rebellion at once. Their closeness grew fevered, desperate. Two bodies clinging not out of lust alone, but because the world wanted them erased. Every touch was defiance. Every breath together a vow that they would not give despair the final word. His scars burned beneath her hands. Yet he pulled her closer, as if her touch was the only thing keeping him from unraveling. When she whispered his name, not as a master, but as a lover, he shuddered as if the sound itself had freed him from 1,000 chains. And when he whispered hers back, it was no longer the voice of a servant. It was equal, it was fire, it was alive. In the ruins of their broken world, intimacy became a weapon sharper than steel. They held each other through the night, not knowing if dawn would bring hunters or hope, but knowing that whatever came, they would face it unchained, together. The night pressed heavy over the ruins, the stars hidden by ash drifting from smoldering cities. He lay against the cracked stone, trembling as if some wild fire gnawed inside him. She kept her hands on his skin, whispering his name again and again, afraid that if she stopped, he would slip into the same void that had already swallowed too many of their kind. His body was no longer only flesh. Beneath every scar, light pulsed, alien, unnatural, a current trying to tear him apart from within. At first, she thought it was death claiming him. But when his eyes opened, blazing like twin embers, she understood something more had taken root. He shook, not from weakness, but from power without anchor. His breaths came as growls, his muscles twitching like he was caught between life and something more. She should have feared him, should have pulled away from that impossible glow. Instead, she pressed closer, her forehead against his, her lips brushing his ear. "You're not breaking," she whispered, fierce and steady. "You're burning, and I won't let you burn alone." The moment her hands smoothed over his chest, the wild energy inside him steadied. The glow calmed, pulsing instead of raging, beating in rhythm with her touch. His jaw tightened, a groan escaping as though he were half in agony, half in release. "It's you," he said through clenched teeth. "You're the only thing keeping me from tearing apart." Her tears fell against his skin, but she kissed them away with trembling lips, each kiss pulling him closer to himself. Their mouths met, hungry, desperate, claiming. Heat surged through him, not the chaotic fire of alien power, but a flame that moved in tandem with hers. Every time she touched him, the glow bent to her will, the chaos melting into something that answered her heartbeat. Soon, it wasn't just survival. Their closeness became rhythm, their passion feeding the energy rather than silencing it. Each breath, each kiss, each gasp tied him more firmly to her. Their bodies moved like sparks colliding with dry tinder, igniting not destruction but creation. She wrapped herself around him as if her embrace alone was strong enough to chain a star. The fire spread across his skin, wrapping them both in a glow that painted the ruins gold. And yet, instead of consuming, it carried them higher, binding them as one force. He clutched her face, his voice ragged but sure. "We're not just surviving. We're something they'll never understand. We're fire together." In her eyes, he saw not fear but devotion, fierce enough to stand against empires. "Then let them come," she whispered, kissing him hard, her lips searing against the glow of his skin. "Let them see what they try to break. Let them see what we've become." And for the first time since chains had bound him, he laughed, not with madness, but with freedom, because he felt it now, blazing inside. The fire was not a curse, not anymore. It was theirs. By dawn, when they rose from the ashes of their hiding place, his body glowed steady, no longer wild, no longer unstable. She walked beside him, her hand in his, the pulse of his power sinking with the warmth of her touch. Together, they were a storm barely contained, a living blaze. And in the distance, when alien ships circled the horizon, he did not shrink back. He stood taller, stronger, with her at his side. For in her arms, he was not broken. He was worshipped. He was fire, and that fire would ignite the world. Ash still drifted in the air when they stepped out of the ruins side by side. He wore the broken chains of his captivity across his shoulders, each link blackened and bent from the fire that had erupted from within him. Once, those chains had dragged him through dirt and humiliation, forcing him to kneel. Now they rattled with every step, not as shackles, but as banners, a sound that echoed louder than war drums. She walked with him, her hand locked to his, her eyes fierce and unyielding. Together, they carried more than survival. They carried defiance. At first, the colonists hiding in shadows did not believe what they were seeing. A slave, thought lost, returned blazing with fire. A governor, once elevated above her kind, now cast aside by her alien masters. The people had been taught to bow, to watch their kin executed on broadcast screens, to silence their own rage. But when the two appeared, glowing with power and devotion, whispers spread like sparks. The slave has risen. The flame has returned. Alien patrols descended fast, their armor shining beneath the fractured sky. Orders barked through metallic translators demanded surrender. He did not flinch. With one sweep of his arm, the fire within him roared to life, chains glowing red as molten banners. The patrol's weapons cracked in the air, but before a bullet could find flesh, she pressed her palm to his back. The fire steadied. He let it go, a tide of flame arcing high, burning through their enemies until only scorched ground remained. The colonists gasped, some stepping back in fear, others falling to their knees in awe. He turned to them, chest heaving, eyes blazing with an ember light that spoke of something more than human. But his voice, when it came, was still his own, scarred but defiant. "They call me slave," he said, lifting the broken chains into the air. "They broke my body, tried to shatter my spirit. But I rose, not because of their power, but because she believed, because we believed. And now I will not bow, not ever again. Neither should you." The words cut deeper than fire. Around them, colonists straightened, shoulders unbowing for the first time in years. Some gripped makeshift weapons. Some simply clenched fists that had once stayed hidden in fear. The atmosphere shifted, fear curdling into rage, despair hardening into resolve. Alien ships darkened the horizon, their shadows crawling across broken towers. Loudspeakers roared, promising punishment, threatening extinction. But then the towers themselves, the alien broadcast spires that had enslaved minds with endless loops of executions and humiliation, flickered. For a moment, static crackled, then an image bloomed across every screen in the colony. Not propaganda, not alien triumph, but him, standing shirtless beneath the fractured sky, body scarred and glowing with unstable fire. Chains draped across his shoulders, his hand linked with hers. And beside him, she lifted her chin, no longer governor, no longer servant, but his equal, his lover, his anchor. Billions across colonies saw them in that moment. Not a slave, not a master, but two humans bound not by oppression, but by love and defiance. Their kiss, fierce and desperate, cut across every broadcast, a kiss not of weakness, but of rebellion. It was raw. It was dangerous. It was freedom. The reaction was immediate. Colonists cheered in hiding, fists slamming against walls in rhythm. Others tore alien banners from their homes, raising broken chains in the streets as symbols of fire. And when the first alien ship swooped down to silence them, it was met not by cowed faces, but by a storm. Rocks, stolen weapons, and the blaze of his fire surged up, tearing through its hull until the craft split open, raining sparks across the city. He stumbled from the effort, chest heaving, the fire threatening to consume him again. But she caught him, hands pressing against his skin, her lips finding his temple. Her whisper steadied the storm. "You're not alone. Burn with me, not against me." The glow steadied. His flames bent, shaped not by rage alone, but by her touch. Together they raised their arms, a storm of fire and fury crashing into the next wave of alien patrols. By dusk, colonists marched with them. What had begun with two became hundreds, then thousands. From ruined streets to shattered plazas, the sound of chains clattering was no longer despair, but defiance. When night fell, alien warships hovered above the colony, their cannons lighting the dark. But below, the people stood unbroken, firelight flickering from their leader's skin. And when he lifted his arm, flames roared skyward, licking across hulls until even the warships themselves seemed to bow under the storm. Side by side, he and she stood at the heart of it. Lovers turned symbols, passion turned revolution. Their kiss had become a battle cry, their bond a weapon greater than any alien machine. Across the colonies, the broadcast did not fade. Billions saw the impossible, a slave who rose, a woman who defied, and together, two lovers who lit an empire on fire. And with every spark that caught in the hearts of their people, the chains of humanity shattered. The war ended not with a bang, but with silence. The alien banners were torn down, their ships smoldering on the horizon, the ashes of an empire drifting in the wind. The colonists whispered his name with reverence, and hers with awe, though for different reasons. To them, he was the fire that could not be broken, the slave who rose. To them, she was the traitor who betrayed her masters for love, for something more than survival. But to him, she was simply the woman who had reached for him in the darkness, and to her, he was the man who had refused to kneel even when chained. In the great square where blood had once pooled, she now knelt before him, trembling. The crowd had gathered, chanting his name, demanding he take the mantle of leader, savior, king. Yet she drowned out their voices with her whisper. "I beg not for forgiveness," she said, her forehead nearly touching the stone. "I beg for your love. Nothing else matters. Not power, not glory, only this." He stared at her, the once proud governor stripped of titles, of power, of the illusions that had caged her. She was only herself now, fragile, raw, and burning with something fiercer than loyalty. His hands, scarred and calloused, reached down and touched her face. He lifted her up, not as a conqueror lifting a subject, but as a man lifting the woman he had always seen beneath the mask. Their lips met, and the roar of the crowd turned into something larger than victory. It became faith, it became legend. For days the people spoke of nothing else. How the fire of rebellion was not born from weapons or strategy, but from love. How two broken souls had turned slavery into defiance, and defiance into freedom. The broadcast traveled to other colonies, sparking whispers of uprisings, rebellions waiting to ignite. Some said his glow was more than flesh, that her voice was more than human, that together they were something elemental, a storm no empire could chain. In the quiet of the nights that followed, they were not legends. They were not symbols. They were simply two people lying side by side in the ruins of a governor's palace, listening to the wind whisper through shattered halls. She traced his scars with her fingers, whispering apologies he never asked for. He kissed the hollow of her throat, whispering promises he never thought he would live long enough to make. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked one night, her head resting on his chest. "They'll remember the fire," he said softly. "But us? We were never meant to be remembered. We were meant to live. And if they turn us into myths?" she pressed, a nervous laugh in her voice. He tilted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes burned, but not with alien light, with something older, something human. "Then let them worship the myth. We'll live the truth." In some versions of the story, the two disappeared from history, leaving only echoes and rumors. In others, their fire spread, colony after colony rising, the empire trembling not before armies, but before the idea that love could be stronger than chains. Some claimed their kiss lit the stars themselves, that constellations were carved in their likeness. But in the truest version, the one whispered only in shadows, they were found years later on a distant world. Not rulers, not warriors, just lovers planting seeds in soil that had never known freedom until they touched it. And so the legend split in two, one of cosmic fire that devoured empires, and one of quiet hands entwined in the dark. Because in the end,